Really does it in the context of the standings, right? He always
Yeah,
says the
yeah.
standings at American Thanksgiving rarely change, right? So if you're in a playoff spot by whenever I guess it's the third or the fourth week of November, then generally speaking, you're going to hold that position. So, and he's right, with one or two exceptions, somebody sometimes comes off the pace, but it doesn't happen very often. So,
Well, a few years ago, I did a story that actually showed that it was actually Halloween, October
oh,
31st. Yeah. Now, subsequent to that, we've had two or
Canadian
three.
Halloween, Kevin.
Yeah, why? Um, anyway, subsequent to that, we've actually, that's been altered a little bit. I think parody has kind of disrupted everything too.
yeah.
Uh, since
Last year, two teams at American Thanksgiving, I believe, that were out of it. I'm pretty sure were the Flyers and the Rangers, that they weren't in the playoffs at American Thanksgiving.
No,
And
Rangers for sure had that horrible start. Yeah.
yeah, the Flyers too. They didn't win a game for a long, long time. So yeah, I think that was and Columbus didn't have a good start last year either. So there might have been a couple teams. I'm trying to remember.
Yeah. And do you remember about 3 years ago, Minnesota had an unbelievable start, and I think that right at American Thanksgiving they fell apart, and they went from having like the best record in the Western Conference to missing the
yeah,
playoffs together. So anyway, but
I'm going
still,
out of my way not to be thankful about anything today as an American because I think that that's important. To separate, to discern the differences between our cultures. I'm going to be a Thanksgiving day. Like a day for people should thank me for things.
yeah.
You just never get. You never.
Does anybody ever thank you, Eklund, or do you just
No, I live a thankless life, Kevin. I do. It's a very thankless existence, and nope. Thanksgiving. I am taking my wife to see Fleetwood Mac on Wednesday night, though.
Oh,
No.
really?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's funny. They're playing in Calgary on the Friday just before Hall of Fame weekend, and I have to figure out if I'm flying in that day. I'm in a weird position. If I'm in Calgary, I can go to Fleetwood Mac, but I also have a ticket to see John Fogerty at the Oshawa Civic Auditorium. I have a single on the floor on that Friday, so
Wow.
I'm trying to negotiate when my arrival day is for Hall of Fame, and either way, I'm either going to see John Fogerty in Oshawa or Fleetwood Mac in Calgary. So there's no bad choice there.
Yeah. Well, Eric, let me tell you this story. If I get you in the same city with Eklund, it'll happen again because I took Alan Adams out with Eck one time, and Alan Adams is a huge music fan, and as you know, Eklund lived in the music world.
Right.
So I was like the third wheel when I got those two together, and that would happen again. Like if I went to dinner with you and Eklund, all of a sudden it would turn to music because I know how much you enjoy music and I know your knowledge is high. Eklund, has lived in that world. So basically, it would be you two carrying the conversation for 2 or 3 hours. I just would be listening.
I love talking to Eric about music. Oh my gosh, that's the first thing I do when I see him, and whenever we get together at one of these events in the finals or whatever. That's just that's your lists are classic. You have these incredible lists.
Yeah. Well, you know what I saw this week? Boz Scaggs is playing here in Calgary at the Jubilee Auditorium, which is
Nice.
a beautiful old facility, and I had a ticket in the 8th row, and I hadn't listened to until the weekend before his new album, and often an artist that's been around as long as someone like Boz Scaggs has been, the material can sometimes be very, very iffy. There's an awful lot of artists of his vintage that will put out new material, and it's hard to get past the hits. I love the new album, and so I downloaded it and was listening to it a lot before the show. And I think seven of the first 8 tracks were from it, and it was interesting. I'm 58. I might have been among the younger people in the auditorium, and people of our age seem to have a hard time listening to new material. And after about 5 songs, some loudmouth stood up and said, "Play an old one."
Oh, people freak out.
And it was. And eventually he did get around to playing some of the hits, but it was a wonderful show, and he's traveling with a great crew of musicians, and it's that I have to say that I like getting out and about. Back in the days when I was dabbling in music writing, Silk Degrees was the first album I ever reviewed for our college paper, and so I have a link to Boz Scaggs that goes back 30 some years and still pretty good.
It's the rare musician that we'll get on to hockey after this, but I do like talking about this actually even more right now. But the thing is this, like the thing that's interesting to me about the bands from that era, very few of them have transitioned into being able to do a concert where people aren't yelling, play Taking Care of Business again, you know.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's the conflict at every concert is
Yeah.
musicians want to play new material. They want to reinvent themselves. They want to be excited, and we want to hear, kind of the old stuff. One of my favorite moments as a concert goer was years ago when I went to a Chicago concert, and the guys from Chicago drew cards on stage to see who had to sing "Color My World." The loser had to sing it. So.
See, that's the jaded musician thing. See, having done and been in this spot for a really minor level where we had a few hit songs that people wanted to hear, and we played for about 12 years, traveling around a lot. So there wasn't anything like that, like we're talking about here. But there's that line between, yeah, we played this song 1,000 times, and we are totally sick of it, and we can do it in our sleep, versus, and that's how you feel when you're the jaded musician. And then I talked to one time Tony Levin, I think it was, the bass player, who was really, a fascinating guy and helped us record one of our albums. And he said, that's true, but at the same time, he said, if you can't feed off the energy about how someone feels about hearing that song that has all these memories connected to them, then then you're dead. He said, you're dead inside, because like that to me is you start playing a song that, yeah, you played a zillion times, but you just feel all of that emotion coming back at you, and that just takes you back into it. So that always is a good sign of a jaded musician when they really can, and they've lost that ability to feel. that's really bad.
Well, I'll tell you the opposite of that. I was in Massey Hall the very first time that Gordon Lightfoot ever played the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. Yeah. And in those days, what you did, I was a high school student in Toronto, and you used to have to order your tickets because Lightfoot would play 10 shows in March every year, and they were mail order. So you would call the Massey Hall box office on Boxing Day or the 27th and say, have the dates been set, and what is the ticket prices? Yes, they've gone up this year. They're $5.50, $4.40, and $3.30. So you'd write out a check, and I would often go. I would take my sister and I would take my girlfriend. So I used to go twice. And so I had tickets for the Thursday night and the Saturday night because I was always in early. I had the 4th row on the Thursday, the 10th row on the Saturday. And so I'm right up front, and he opened with Old Dan's Records or something like that. And then he said, I'm going to play a new song that we've never played in concert before. And he told the story about the Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald and the Maritime Sailors Cathedral in Detroit, and then he started to sing it. And no one had heard it before, so it was 4.5 minutes. And then then the song ended. No one knew when the song was going to end, and there was this pause, 1001, 1002 of just silence, and then the place exploded. I mean, exploded. People stood on their feet, cheering, yelling, crying. It was an unbelievable reaction to a song that no one had ever heard before. So 2 nights later, I'm sitting there with my girlfriend, and he goes through the same thing, and I said, just listen and then watch. And the reaction was exactly the same by the audience. It was amazing. Pause, and then people went crazy. And I thought, okay, this is a song that is going to be a hit. And a song about, a tragedy on the Great Lakes about a freighter, that wasn't playing big on American pop radio, but this one broke through. So, it can go the other way. Sometimes
it can. No, and that's the dream of a musician. As a musician,
so strong. You can just absorb it. And get that kind of reaction.
And when you're a musician, you always think every song you've written is the greatest next thing, So you're just going out there and you're playing, and you're really excited to play new songs for people because you want to hear how they react to it. And you're, even though some of them will just tune it out and go get a beer or whatever during that song, you know that you want to just definitely hear the reaction. And there's nothing like that. I've had that happen a couple times where it's just like where there is that. That's when you know a song is good because you work on a song a lot, and then you're out there and. Within the group, you play it so many times that it's an old song to you, so you start to get it, you like it, you think it's really good, it grows on you, but then when you play it for somebody else, you start hearing it through their eyes. And even sometimes when I've done a song for the first time on stage, I realize like a quarter of the way through the song, this song is not very good. And I thought it was awesome. I thought it was awesome in rehearsals. Like I was sitting there and I'm like, this song was great in rehearsals. We got this. We worked hard and sometimes maybe too hard on making it something good. And now we're playing it and I can see and I'm like, you know what? But then you've had this reaction. But I've had the other thing too where you play a song that you really think is good and everyone's just like, whoa, when people come up, when's that song going to be on an album? And that's amazing. So that's music. That's the Cranky Music Writers Show for today. for Monday, October 13th. But we'll get going here. We're going to introduce the show, and how we should do it is I'll say the date, and then Kevin, you say I'm Kevin Allen, USA Today Sports. Then you'll say I'm Eric Duhatschek, Globe and Mail, and then I'll come back, and then we'll start on him. Ready?
Okay.
Hello, Hockey World. It is Monday, October 13th, 2014.
I'm Kevin Allen of USA Today.
And I'm Eric Duhatschek of the Globe and Mail.
And I'm Eklund, and you're watching and listening to the premiere episode. This is our pilot show of a show we like to call at this point at least, the Cranky Hockey Writers Show. And this is the show where Kevin, Eric, and I will get together, and sometimes with a guest on occasion, and just discuss things that are happening in the hockey world from maybe like an older perspective, more jaded, more angry. Not necessarily, because actually the secret about the Cranky Hockey Writers Show is it's actually three pretty optimistic people. But as this plays out, I'm sure we'll have some cranky guests, and I'm sure there will be some things, because if there is something that you can be assured of, that it is indeed, there are moments when we will get frustrated by the craziness of the hockey world. But indeed, I'm really excited to do this show, and I hope you guys like it a lot. Let me know in the comments, and we're gonna let me know if there's a particular Cranky Hockey Writer that you know or follow on Twitter that you would like to see join us, and we will try to get them to come on board. That's the power of having Kevin and Eric with us. They can make anyone do anything in the hockey world. So I'm really excited about that. And the season's underway, and one of the things that sort of kind of dawned on me, NBC in America has this thing they do on Wednesday night called Rivalry Night, and it's good because they did it for opening night, where they have teams that are longtime rivals, like they had the Flyers and the Bruins were playing, and they had the Wild and the Avalanche, but it got me thinking about the classic rivalries and how in recent years some of the rivalries have been mismatched and how they lost some of their impact. And yet I thought this year, when I went through some of the what I consider classic rivalries, that they're actually, some of them are pretty even again. Like there's a lot of evenness as to who's going to win and who's going to lose in some of these classic rivalries. And I thought we would start, maybe Kevin, maybe we'll start with you, with what you think. I put a list of rivalries together for you guys. What is the greatest rivalry? We'll start there in your opinion. And this is always a tough one to call, obviously, but the greatest rivalry in hockey. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It is tough, and I think there's sort of been a reset since the last season, when we had the rule reformation, and we've sort of changed the scheduling, and now we've had a conference realignment on top of that, and I think it's a little more difficult now to kind of sort through all that. I think Detroit, for example, was involved in some of the better rivalries, but now they've even switched conferences. So it's sort of hard to define now really good rivals. I mean, I'm still, Boston, Montreal still exists. The fans there certainly get into that, particularly in Boston. I noticed, like, they're very interested in that. And I think, the Battle of Alberta has not been as strong because the teams haven't been as good. So that's sort of fallen off. And I thought Detroit and Chicago was a terrific rivalry too, but because now they're in opposite conferences, we're only going to see that if we ever get to the postseason. So right now, my favorite rivalry, I'm going to call it my favorite because it's not the best, is LA and Chicago. I think now that because of the recent history in the playoffs and the fact that they're premium teams in the Western Conference, I think their style of play, on one hand, one is celebrates big and strong and tough, and the other celebrates sort of the finesse side of it as well. Kind of different styles, and yet in the salary cap world, they've both been able to maintain high level of performance when everybody said that wasn't going to happen when we first introduced the salary cap. So I would call that my favorite rivalry right now. I like it when those two teams play, particularly in the playoffs.
I like that. I'm right now that has to be the greatest game you can watch. Those two teams, right? I mean, and how a rivalry's built, and this I think is a little bit. I mean, even though the geography is different, to a similar way to how, to me, the Battle of Alberta was built, Eric. Because to me, what we've seen are two incredible playoff series between these two teams, and that really builds a rivalry, right? I mean, there's no question that that Chicago and LA are our rivals from the last year, seeing one of the best playoff series we've seen in a decade, maybe. And this is how, you're out in your neck of the woods. The Battle of Alberta started. What's your earliest memories of the Battle of Alberta?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll make the distinction between historic
Mm-hmm.
and current rivalries. And you're right,
Yep.
the historic rivalry in Calgary dates back to the fact that Edmonton was really good and Calgary was really terrible. In fact, last week I was in Edmonton for 3 days for the Oilers' 30th anniversary celebration. So Wayne Gretzky was there, Mark Messier, Paul Coffey, all of those guys, and they talked a little bit about what made them great. And one of the things that Messier said was, he said the fact that Calgary was an emerging team and got to be very competitive forced us to up our game. And he said, I'm not sure that we would have won the Stanley Cup in 1984 if we hadn't had that hard series against the Flames in the second round. Remember, that one went 7 games. And Messier was just a force in that deciding game. He put Mike Eves in the hospital. He injured Paul Reinhardt. He injured Al McInnes. I've never seen one player in one game so physically dominant as Messier was on that particular occasion. And they got through the third round pretty quickly, and actually, it only took them 5 games to beat the New York Islanders. So, but there's a rivalry that was fueled by playoff series after playoff series. Calgary beat them in 1986. Probably the best Oiler team that they had on paper was the one that lost in the second round to the Flames, and then they got back and won 3 more championships after that. So that's, what you talked about before, Eck, is exactly right. If you have playoff series after playoff series where you have not just the contempt that arises from familiarity, but the respect. I'll never forget Drew Doughty on the ice after they won the Stanley Cup about the Rangers. He couldn't talk about the Rangers series. All he could talk about was the Blackhawks series. People kept asking him about it, and it was like, yeah, the Rangers were good too, but Chicago, it was Chicago, it was beating Chicago. And I remember talking to Justin Williams about this just last month, and he said, it was probably very hard for them to lose that 7th game in overtime the way it ended. He said, but it would have been even more devastating for us because we had lost to them the year before, and if we had lost 2 years in a row to that team, I don't know where it would have left us psychologically. So, I mean, rivalries, the only way to get them is to be very good, and that's why Calgary-Edmonton isn't a great rivalry right now. Neither team is very good, and you have to play again and again and again. And I think you develop that healthy respect that exists right now between Chicago and Los Angeles. And so they get out there and they compete and they play and they're so close. And at the end of it, they leave there and they have a great admiration for each other for what they're accomplishing. The level of hockey is so high that that's what turns it into a great rivalry.
No, I definitely have to agree. I have to agree with that. I mean, that series was you just felt like you were watching something special every night, and you wanted the game to be a best of 15. It would have been, you couldn't stop it. I mean, you didn't want to stop it. Some series you're like, oh, is it game 5? Oh, it's only game 5. That series was like, wow, best of 15 would have done it. But what's funny is as much as just staying with Calgary and Edmonton for a second, and then moving on to another one. As much as that series has lost, I guess some of its vigor, well, a lot of its vigor, probably because both teams have been struggling. There's still the easiest way to get page views is to ask people who's better, Calgary or Edmonton. It hasn't gone away. There's no, it's still there, and what I think is honestly the case is now we have 2 teams that are maybe, Calgary's been better for a few years now, pretty obviously, but now I think you're at the point where these teams are once again kind of even.
Yeah, and there's a reason. I think there's a reasonable level of excitement in both Calgary and Edmonton, knowing that the future isn't right now, but it's coming. You can sort of sense that it's nearing. I mean, Calgary this year has got they lost Sam Bennett, but because of that shoulder surgery, but he looks like he's going to be a terrific player. And I think the expectation here is that the Flames might be the worst team in the Western Conference, and if so, can they draft a Connor McDavid or a Jack Eichel within the market? And I'm based in Calgary. The fan base is talking about generational players, and when you think about it, when was the last time a generational player in the NHL played on a Canadian team. I mean, you know, who is that guy? It might be Gretzky, or it might have been Messier because he played 2 years longer than Wayne Gretzky. But you know, if you look at the Canadian content in the National Hockey League, I mean, Jerome McGinley won a scoring title, the Sedins have won scoring titles, Jose Theodore won an MVP. But most of the generational players, from Sidney Crosby and Alex Ovechkin back to Eric Lindros, when he came into the league, he was a generational player. They've all been playing for American teams. So the level of excitement here is, if you're really bad this year and you draft a guy like that, that just hasn't happened. And for a Canadian generational player to play on a Canadian team would be unprecedented. So I think that's what's simmering in the background of the teams in Canada right now. A lot of them aren't very good, but if by some happenstance they can land a Connor McDavid, that would just explode. This is a country that is waiting for that. You know, all of our top Canadian players that have been playing historically for American teams, if that were to change as a result of this season, that would create a real interesting dynamic up here.
That's a good point. I'm trying to think of one now, and I mean, Carey Price in Montreal, maybe, but
not a generational player. Like the difference is, there are a lot of excellent players. There are a lot of. I mean, Matt Sundin was an excellent player for the Toronto Maple Leafs for a long time. He made it to the Hall of Fame. But we're talking about that level of when a guy can win a scoring title. When Sidney Crosby's healthy, he wins the scoring title.
Yeah, even historically that's true. If you're thinking about it, Gordie Howe played in Detroit, Bobby Hull played in Chicago. Rocket Richard would probably be an example of that. But for the most part, they haven't been able. I wonder how that would impact too Crosby's popularity. Like I'm always bothered by my emails whenever I write about Crosby, because we've spoken about this before. He has such a lightning rod, and I find there's so many people who take shots at him. And I wondered if he played in Canada, because still the bulk of my emails come from Canada. And I wonder if there would be this anti-sentiment if he played for Toronto or in a Canadian city. I'm just kind of curious if that would be the case. Because, obviously he's a Canadian hero of the 2010 Olympic gold medal run. So
yeah, and when he goes to Canada, it's almost like the Who's on tour. Like you hear about Crosby's in Calgary and Edmonton this week.
Well, even when he was a junior player, I went up and did a story on him and toured about. And I remember one of the quotes from one of the older guys was, it was like the Beatles were, making their tour of the first time. Like there would be several hundred fans waiting outside after these games, where I'd go and interview him, then go outside, and there'd be a few hundred fans. And I remember he had such an interesting quote, and I felt it really kind of showed his maturity. I asked him what was the hardest thing about being Sidney Crosby in those situations. He goes, trying to strike a balance to the obligation I feel I have to the game to sign autographs and sort of do what I can to promote the game, and the obligation I feel to my teammates not to hold the bus up too long. And I thought, the guy's 16 years old and is already trying to think like that. I thought he had a maturity that was really remarkable.
Kevin, I spent 3 days with him in Edmonton last year in January, because the way the Penguins road trip went, it went Vancouver, Edmonton, and they had a couple of off days up there. So I went up there basically to do an advance on the Olympics, and that has not changed. In fact, one of the great questions that came up, I think on the third day he was there, was about his autograph. It was Jim Matheson of the Edmonton Journal that asked him, and he said, "How has your autograph changed from the time that you were a 16-year-old kid?" He says, "Have you shortened it up a little bit?" He said, "Absolutely. You would not be able to recognize if you got an autograph from Sidney Crosby as a 16-year-old and you got one from him last January in Edmonton. It's like, yes, see, and then the number, and you watch him go down that line, because the people that are there in the arena are incredibly respectful of Sidney Crosby. I know that there are a lot of people who will sit at home and take shots at him on the internet, but people who interact with him, and I watched that for a couple of days because I was just hanging around to try and sort of get a feel for how it was. He's extremely polite. He is extremely patient, and the people are very orderly too, and everybody, even if they just have 5 seconds of Sidney Crosby, are very happy to get him. So I think if he were to ever play in Canada, which I don't think is ever going to happen, I think he would be extremely well received. I'm not sure that sort of that vocal minority that is negative towards Sidney Crosby, if those people would come out of the woodwork nearly as much if he were based on a Canadian team.
Well, and especially if he wasn't in the division he's in, because remember the division he's in right now has a lot of vocal people in it. I mean, we're playing with Philadelphia, New York, and even Washington. Of course, there's the whole rivalry there. But yeah, the fact that he's playing, I mean, watching the Flyers-Penguins rivalry, to transition a little bit to rivalry, with that's been a fascinating one to watch along the way, because one of the things with Crosby is I remember one time talking to Danny Briere and Claude Giroux about this and saying, what do you guys think about Crosby getting booed all the time? And they just both said, we love the guy. They just said flat out, we think he's a great player. We hate to play. I mean, Claude, we'll get in a fight with him in a playoff series, but they have nothing but admiration for him. They think he's one of the greatest guys out there, and and they're Flyers fans will take their shots, Rangers fans will take their shots, and I think that's part of the hatred about Crosby is where he plays. If he was on Anaheim, I don't think it would be so crazy. Or if he was, it's not just America. I think it's where he is in America. It's a very viral type thing. Although it's hard to say, what he would be. Take another thing. Steve Stamkos, rumors to Toronto will never end, right? Until he signs that big 12-year contract or whatever it's going to be. They're going to try to get him back to Toronto. P.K. Subban almost left Montreal. It felt like that was and then rumors of players not wanting to play in Canada this summer were abounding everywhere. So I think you're right, Eric. It would be a great thing. It would be a great thing for Canada in general, and that would be fantastic. The Flyers-Penguins series, which is my favorite rivalry right now for obvious reasons, because I'm here and I've seen it so many times and I've seen it develop as a kid. And it developed very similar to the way you're saying Calgary-Edmonton developed, Eric, in that the Penguins just couldn't beat the Flyers for years. I mean, it was a crazy thing. I remember at one point there was, I think throughout my entire elementary school and grade school, the Penguins didn't win in the Spectrum. there was an entire 7 years there where they didn't win. And they would come in, and even I remember the closest they came to winning was that during the Flyers' 35-game unbeaten streak, and it was the game that tied, I think, the record of 28 at the time, and the Penguins were winning 2-1 with 30 seconds to go, and that was going to end the Flyers streak and end the Penguins streak of not winning in Philly. And Ben Wilson scored a goal with, I think, 10 seconds left to keep the Flyers streak alive, and of course there was no overtime, so we just continued on, right? But now, with the recent playoff series, especially of the high scoring playoff series that we had, it's gotten really good, and it got really good with Mario Lemieux coming through, because Mario and there was a classic Flyers Penguins throwback a few nights ago. Jágr's in town with the Devils, and back in the day, when Jágr would come to Philly, I'm sure you guys were at some of these games. In the Spectrum, the Flyers fans would ruthlessly whistle at Jaromir Jágr, like he was, because he had the long hair. They would do the whole, whistling, catcalling, and they did this with Ron Duguay and Jaromir Jágr. They were the two players that they loved to do this with. So of course Jágr came here, was pretty loved here, and played only a year, but they liked him here a lot. So the other night against the Devils, Jágr's out there on the power play, and I haven't heard this in probably 10 years. Someone just does this big giant cat call whistle down to Jágr, and it's like the only people from the Spectrum days would even get this. But that's how deep that rivalry goes. It was so intense for such a long time. And I think that's right up there with LA and Chicago in terms of maybe the vintage rivalries that you can go back that have lasted for a long time that are still going today.
Yeah, that one has an extra layer too, because of the fact they're both in the same state. So I think there is a Pittsburgh-Philadelphia natural rivalry just from people in the cities, and it carries over in other sports as well. So I know Tom McMillan, my friend, who's the vice president of communication for the Penguins, told me the story. They took, after the Penguins won the Cup last time, they took the Cup to the State House in Harrisburg, and they brought it in, and of course all the local Pittsburgh area representatives came out to meet it, but the Philadelphia rep stood up in the stairwell and booed as the Cup was brought in. So I think when you've got a rivalry that sort of crosses political lines and gets everyone involved, it makes a lot of sense. And you can notice too I love the walk up when I go to games in Pittsburgh. Because there's so many people milling about and like 100% participation in the wearing of jerseys. And when you go there, when the Philadelphia's in town, some Philadelphians will brave and wear their jersey, and they never walk in unscathed. I mean, I don't care whether you're a 10-year-old or a 75-year-old man. If you're wearing a Flyers jersey, you're going to get it. So that's a very intense rivalry.
No, for
One
sure.
of the rivalries that I've seen a lot of is the Los Angeles Anaheim one. I mean, I cover the Western Conference, and just because Calgary and Edmonton haven't been very good, I've spent a lot of time in California the last couple of years, and the rivalry between the Kings and the Ducks, still, even after one playoff series, to me is a very manufactured rivalry. They have a thing called the Freeway Series, where they try to make a big deal out of the games back and forth. They were able to play against each other in the outdoor game at Dodger Stadium, a wonderful event. They went 7 games in the playoffs, and still I don't feel that there is a rivalry there. And I think that there just has to be a little bit more animosity. I think part of it has to do with the fact that, well, not only did Dustin Penner play for each team a couple of different times, but they skated together during the lockout, and so the depth of acrimony that you need to create a real rivalry isn't there yet. Now, I'm interested to see what happens the first time they play in the regular season this year, if they can build off of that fairly nasty playoff series last year. And certainly, I know from a Ducks perspective, to have the Kings right there for the taking and then to lose the series really stung. And one of the reasons that they remade their team this year and brought in a guy like Brian Kessler was that they felt that they just didn't match up particularly well against LA down the middle, and they felt that in order to become LA's peer or to exceed them in the playoffs, that they needed more there. And it does remind me a little bit of Calgary Edmonton in the early days, because Calgary was always a step behind, and Edmonton always found a way of winning. And so most of what Calgary did was reactive to what Edmonton did. It's hard to do in a 30-team NHL, but I do think that the way the playoff structure is right now, last year was the first year that these two Southern California teams played in the playoffs, and now with the possibility of 4 teams in the Pacific Division making the playoffs, with those teams being probably good for a while yet, I think we're going to see more playoff series, and maybe this will turn into a real rivalry than the kind of manufactured one that they have right now.
Well, they have the problem with geography, which the Flyers have with the Devils, which is that New Jersey, a lot of New Jersey roots for the Flyers, and the New Jersey team is considered a New York team, and it's not. But then the Anaheim team, Anaheim and now Los Angeles didn't have a natural rival in any way, shape, or form before this. The Dodgers and Angels are in different leagues, right? So, but there is something interesting that you brought up there, and that is a sign of a rivalry, I think, when you start picking up players specifically to beat your rival. that is something that we've seen throughout. I mean, we saw that, I think, with Detroit and Colorado, Kevin, too. Like back in the day, I think that's when you start looking at that. Like, we've got to beat this team. That's a rivalry, Kev.
Yeah, no, I would agree, and that rivalry obviously is not what it once was, and I'm not even sure really that it exists, only in that it gives the writers something to write about when Colorado play, because again, they're in opposite conferences now, but and in its heyday, it was a nasty rivalry. I mean, I think epitomized by the fact that at various points in their careers, both Brendan Shanahan and Peter Forsberg, and Peter Forsberg was very serious about this when he said I will never play for the Detroit Red Wings, and he had an opportunity. When he was an unrestricted free agent, the Red Wings made a run at him, and here he had a chance to play with and basically what was Team Sweden in the NHL, and he said no, he just could not do it. He could not bring himself to do it, and that was a nasty rivalry. Guys who didn't even normally play rugged roles did in that series, and the fact that they had the McCarty attack of Lemieux and the Lemieux attack that had come before against Draper, and the 2 goalie fights that we've had as well. I mean, all of that led in. I mean, Adrian Data wrote a book about the intensity of that rivalry, and it was huge. But it was really a short period of time when you think about it.
Yeah.
It was not something that lasted long. I mean, we still talk about it, but what's interesting, and it certainly wasn't true in that rivalry. But one point I would make is that I think the identity of the rivalries has been lost a little bit by the conference name changes. Like I remember, I used to love like the Patrick Division rivalries. You could sort of identify all the teams, and the Smythe Division, the Adams Division. I remember Jeff Jacobs, who covered the Hartford Whalers, used to have what he called his Adams Division wallet, which was half American money and half Canadian money because he traveled so much to Canada. But those rivalries were intense, and I think we miss as fans of the game those identifiable labels of our divisions, conferences in this case. Like I think in geography, you say to yourself, well, it's an Atlantic Division rivalry. It's not the same as when you used to say it's a Patrick Division rivalry or a Smythe Division rivalry. The identity of the conferences has been lost a little bit, and I think that sort of diminished the rivalries a little bit. Not a lot. I mean, still a playoff series or two can generate it again. But I think if I'm in the marketing business of the NHL, I would not have done what they did in terms of going with geography as opposed to the names.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And I mean, do we need the Gordie Howe division, the Wayne Gretzky division? Do we need these things back? Is that where we should go? Do you guys think?
I think we should go back to the names that Kevin articulated, because if you rename the divisions, you would have to start from scratch. And I think that there are, and maybe it doesn't matter to 20-somethings watching hockey now, but to people of a certain generation, as Kevin said, like we talked about the Smythe Division. It was Calgary, Edmonton. It was Calgary, Winnipeg. Sometimes it was Vancouver, Edmonton. But those were the great Smythe Division rivalries. It would not have. They could have easily reinstituted those names, and I think that they would have got a real bang for the publicity buck, and it would have been at virtually no cost to them.
I agree with that. Now, LA, Chicago, the rivalry now, I would compare a little bit to Colorado, Detroit, in that I think it is a short-term rivalry. I think that we're looking at, two teams here that I don't think, 10 years from now we're going to be looking at LA, Chicago as necessarily this major rivalry. I mean, am I wrong there, do you think?
Not necessarily. No, I mean, I guess it depends on how long they can keep this up. I mean, I remember when obviously the salary cap was introduced, they said you'd never be able to hold a team together long term, but the Kings are going for 3 and 4, and Blackhawks are going for 3 and 6, and both of those teams are still, in my mind, among the top 5 teams in the league. So I mean, it could last a little bit longer, but it would be better if they were in the same division for sure, or in the same conference.
Yeah, and the other thing, Eric, I think that when you look at LA, Anaheim, it sort of reminds me a little bit of what I think I kind of always expected to happen with Montreal and Ottawa, which is that where you have the Anaheim fans were Kings fans, right? They were Kings fans for years. I mean, and in Ottawa they were Canadiens fans, and you haven't really seen Montreal, Ottawa take off like I think you would expect it to in a similar way. Am I right there?
No, you are right. I think that Ottawa and Montreal had a really memorable playoff series a couple of years ago, and it was nasty, and it spilled into the interview rooms afterwards. And I think it was Brandon Prust that called Paul McLean a fat walrus. I mean, so that they really had a chance to build off of that. But it was it was a one-off thing because Ottawa missed the playoffs last year and seems to be going backwards, and it is a team that I'm not sure. It's going to take a couple of years for the Ottawa Senators to sort themselves out in terms of where they are. So, and Montreal probably is the best team in Canada, but no one would put them in the category of an elite team yet. So there needs to be a little bit more history, and I think that there unfortunately was an opportunity lost last year. If somehow Ottawa had managed to make the playoffs, if they'd been able to reprise the playoff series that they played the year before, I think that would have given the rivalry a toehold. But I think it has gone backwards a little bit since then.
Yeah, I feel that way. There's another kind of rivalry too that I was just thinking of as we're saying this, and that would be like the Toronto-Buffalo rivalry, which I would equate with the Rangers-Islanders rivalry, which is sort of which was the Flyers-Capitals rivalry at one point, which is when one team will invade the other team's arena when they play. Right?
Yeah.
So this is in Washington, Flyers fans would go down there, it would be half Flyers fans, and then the same thing you get in Buffalo, you get all the Maple Leaf fans coming in, and on the island you get a lot of Rangers fans coming over too. That I think is the best of those three rivalries. The Islanders Rangers is still a very good one because there are a lot of really solid Islanders fans too, but that's another level. And then one of the more interesting things I saw a few years ago when the Flyers played the Capitals in a very good 7-game series was I was impressed that Washington had beaten that. Like I felt like I was down there in Washington for the first time, and I used to go to the Cap Center as a kid. I would drive down there, and there would be 10,000 Flyers fans in there. I felt like, but when I went to the Verizon Center to cover the Capitals Flyers series, it was a Capitals fans. This was Cap fans. There were a few Flyers fans there, like you see anywhere you go, but it was really Caps fans. So that's that really evil spirited rivalry that you get in Buffalo, especially right now.
I think we may upgrade the Islanders Rangers rivalry when they move to Brooklyn. I mean, Brooklyn versus Manhattan, I think, is going to be a little bit different than Long Island versus Manhattan. There's a connection there. It's a closer proximity. It's going to be interesting to see where the Islander players settle. A lot of the single Ranger players have traditionally live in Manhattan, and I could see the Islanders the same way. So it'll be interesting to see. Obviously in a smaller building, and with the Islanders, in my mind at least, becoming a much better team too. There may not be the availability of tickets for Ranger fans to get there, so we could start seeing sort of an intense building for the Rangers to play in, and they facing similar to what the Islanders do when they come to Manhattan. So I think that rivalry could be on the upswing.
Yeah, that's
a rivalry that I'm really looking forward to is at the start of the year, we had to make our predictions, and the team that I like as a dark horse candidate out of the West is the Minnesota Wild. I just think that they've done a really nice job of assembling some pieces there, and if their goaltending held up, I think that that's a team that they played in the final 8 last year, and I think that they have a chance to come out of the West. What if Minnesota and Boston ever met in a Stanley Cup final? With the traditional rivalry that exists between those two pockets, like the two primary developmental pockets of hockey in the United States, could that ever spill over into a great NHL rivalry? I don't know. I mean, I'm not sure that you can ever create a rivalry between one team from one conference and one team from the other. But you guys know better than I, what the depth of animosity, if such a thing exists, between Minnesota, the state of hockey, and that New England area, which also develops historically a lot of players. How would that play if somehow the Bruins and the Wild were to meet in the Stanley Cup final?
If it had happened in the 1970s or 80s, blood would be spilled. I mean, back then, even Olympic teams, it was almost like you were putting players on Noah's Ark, because you had to have so many from Minnesota and so many from Boston. Otherwise, people would be all upset. The politics were hateful, to say the least. But now, because the way the U.S. program, the development program, players come together at a much earlier age. They're all playing together as part of the national development program. I'm not sure that it would still be the same. I think it would be something, though, that USA Hockey would beat the drum for, because you're absolutely right. I mean, the Massachusetts area and Minnesota, that's the feeder system for the U.S. program, and then obviously Michigan is strong as well. But the hockey bell obviously has changed in the United States. We used to, I did a book with Chris Chelios this summer, and he came out of San Diego, and I think that's one of the more remarkable accomplishments ever for a player to be playing hockey at age 16 and 17 in San Diego, at a time when he wasn't going to select camps or any of that stuff, and come out of there. Well, that's changed now. I mean, we're taking a lot of talent out of California, so it's sort of more of a melting pot than it was before. So probably wouldn't be as great as it would have been had that happened a long time ago.
And I get a sense that it's a little bit like the junior hockey fans in Ontario are a little bit different than the NHL fans. I get the same sense of the college hockey fans in those two states are different than the NHL fans to a degree. Like there's definitely, like, when Boston University plays University of Minnesota, that's an amazing game. Still, I think it carries over there, but because that's got such a history. But I don't think it carries into the NHL level as much.
One other interesting thing about those two states is the development programs there. Like no other states have such a sophisticated high school programs as the occurs in the state of Minnesota. But the one that comes close is Boston. You know, their prep school hockey is very good there as well. So, you know, there would be some comparisons, and I'm sure the writers would stir up all that and try to create a rivalry because we're always looking for something to write about.
Before we get to what I think is the greatest rivalry in all of hockey, which is going to be the end of the show, the one rivalry I sort of have high hopes for, and then I'm going to throw out one rivalry I think has been that the NHL screwed up on. And here's the two of them. Okay, so the one that I think that I have high hopes for is the Florida-Tampa rivalry, which I think has not existed at all. I've talked to friends who live in Florida and live in Tampa, and you would think these two, or live in Miami, I should say, in Tampa, you would think these two teams would have I mean, they're both in the state of Florida, they're both down there, and there really is not anything to it. They kind of almost root for each other when they're not playing, and there's a weird feeling of like, you know, that then you could never root for your rival. So, but both of those teams feel like they're about 5 to 6 years away from maybe having like a hell of a playoff series. Like perhaps that you can see that like where they're going. That could be something that would be what could take it over the edge. And then my rivalry, I feel like that the NHL screwed up on is not putting Nashville and Carolina in the same division. And I know that's hard to figure out a way of doing that, but having been to both arenas and feel the sense of both, there really is that great college, you know, Southeastern football conference fan thing going down there, and those you know, there's a lot of University of Tennessee, Georgia. You know, I also thought the same thing with the Thrashers when they were there. I felt like there was a sense there that Nashville should have been in the Southeast. That would have made those are all great college football towns at least, and they do hate each other. So, thoughts on either, Eric?
Well, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you know, Tampa, Florida, I think no one would cheer more for an Eastern Conference final in Tampa than Canadian writers. So, I mean, that would be, the geography of that is very appealing to people who live north of the border. And in fact, if you could somehow manage to turn it into a February series, I think that it would be very, very well attended. I mean, I hope you're right. I think that both teams, as you allude to, I mean, they've got young pieces coming. So, you know, keeping those pieces together, developing at a time when Tampa is on the upswing, but Florida seems to be treading water a little bit. I mean, it is going to take some time there. I mean, I think you answered the question when you asked it too, in terms of how you get Nashville and Carolina playing each other more. Just the geography of the National Hockey League unfortunately skews east. And all those teams that play in the Eastern Time Zone want to be in the Eastern Conference. So, you know, right now they need more teams in the West, not fewer. And so the idea that you could actually move Nashville into the Eastern Conference, it just creates an even greater imbalance than we have right now. So that to me is the biggest issue. But you're right; those could be outstanding rivalries depending on on how the teams evolve in the next little while. I'm interested to see Nashville this year. To me, they're a team that has a lot of. I think they're going to be a lot better than people think. People forget how competitive they were last year without their number one goaltender for most of the season. And so, you know, they've got Rene back right now. They've got that young defense core. They've added some bodies up front that might be able to score some goals. Nashville, to me, is a team to watch this year.
Yep.
Well, I mean, the difficulty of the Florida Panthers is that they went so long, almost a decade. They went a decade without making the playoffs, and so we really don't even have any idea whether the hockey will work there. And I think we got to find that out. And the lesson of that obviously is Carolina. You know, there's so much negativity surrounding the Hurricanes and whether they were going to last there, and then all of a sudden they won a cup, and now we look at it as one of the league's more enchanting franchises, just for the reasons you mentioned. I mean, both Nashville and Carolina have such unique experiences for fans going to the game. In Carolina, it's the only place I know where tailgating, it's very much a college atmosphere, just as you mentioned. It feels like you're going to a football game, and it's a great experience. And then Nashville, it's the favorite road trip for most NHL scouts and writers, and I think for a lot of fans who like to go to the honky tonks. And there's a main street. For those who don't know, the arena is right downtown, and all the great honky tonks with the great music is there. So it's a unique experience. So I would agree with you that it would have been nice to find a way to get those two teams hooked up in the same division, but the geography doesn't work. It's one of the issues is that, and I think going forward, it's going to be one of the difficulties of expansion, is trying to make that all work without being too disruptive. Because right now, what you would say to yourself is, well, Quebec City, everybody wants to go there, but if you bring, that's certainly an Eastern Conference team that needs to come in there. And we need to really find two in the Western Conference. So there's trouble ahead. And Florida, getting back to Florida and Tampa, where we started this, I think you really have to hope that these younger players, Barkov, Ekblad, Huberdeau, are going to step up and turn that team around pretty quickly if you want to see. Otherwise, we may be looking at the possibility of them being on the watch list to be moved.
Yeah, they could be in Quebec. But yeah, it only doesn't work because we're so hung up on Eastern, Western things. Why not northern, southern things? Like this is my we have. I mean, I understand you got the time zones, right? But
Dallas it would never work. Yeah, sorry, it would never work. Just for the reason you say. I mean, the television markets wouldn't work. Think about Dallas for all those years playing in the Pacific Division. It killed their television ratings because they would go on the road and all those games would start 2 hours beyond their time zone. It was
right.
The most difficult thing. Now, one thing's I think that the only way that you could do it is to do 3 conferences of 10. And so you would have an East Conference, a West Conference, and then you would group the teams that are in the middle. And potentially then a few of the Eastern teams would have to be in what we would call the Midwest Conference. And maybe you could shift Carolina in there to play with Nashville and have St. Louis in there and Minnesota and Colorado and have 3 conferences of 10. And then potentially, I guess, you could go, instead of a 32-team league, which is, I think, the end game for the NHL within the next 4 to 6 years. Maybe you could go to a 33-team NHL and have 11 teams in each conference. I'm not sure how you would structure playoffs on the basis of that, but it has to be north-south. It can't be east-west. And so, but
I know I'm using my Eastern bias.
Conferences of 11 or 3 conferences of 10 right now. I could see that.
I like that. I know I'm using my Eastern bias because I can drive within 8 hours. I can drive to almost half the NHL. It feels like they're all right here, and I know where you are out there. Everybody is so much further spread apart. But Dallas is only 1 hour different from the East, whereas it's not the 2 hour difference. So to me, 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock games, it's not that. I mean,
but again, moving Dallas East doesn't solve problems. It just creates more problems.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Finally, the last thing I want to talk about is what I think is the best rivalry in the NHL, and this is why. And it's just, I'm not trying to skip over Boston Montreal here, because that is we talked about it a little bit, is an incredible rivalry, and there's so much to that. And there's another great element of a rivalry, which is that one team dominates the other, which I think is something that really is a good, when that happens, where Montreal just has the number of Boston, never seen more so than last year. That's a great thing. But Toronto-Montreal, to me, is still the best rivalry in hockey, because it doesn't matter how good those teams are. And that's the one rivalry that it won't matter. And it's the one rivalry that, to me, it's I will make sure that I'm watching the opening, and the fact that they've managed now to play them on opening night against each other is just, that's the way to kick off the season. I mean, to me, that is the best rivalry in hockey, and it just, because it goes back so far in history, and those teams were so dominant for such a long time. And the cities, obviously, Toronto and Montreal, there's a natural rivalry between those cities as well. So, any objections, Kevin? You look like you're objecting.
No, not at all. But I think it's the rivalry that's a little bit unique because it's based, I think, on the fans and not on the teams.
Yeah.
Because Toronto has, obviously has not won a cup since '67 and has had some troubles even making the playoffs. But their fans are so passionate, and Montreal fans, and there's just certainly, when you see any story about them and read what the fans have to say about it, the fans have kept that rivalry alive even when the Maple Leafs haven't been good. So I think that's the uniqueness of it, that the fans fuel the passion of that rivalry more so than what has happened on the ice.
Yeah, and the history too. I mean, I grew up in Toronto, and so I was a Leaf fan as a kid growing up. And as much as you love to see Chicago come in, you love to see Detroit come in. It was the games against the Montreal Canadiens that defined the rivalry. In fact, in those days, it was so hard as a kid to get tickets to watch the Leaf games that rivalry spilled over into junior hockey because the Montreal Junior Canadiens played in the OHL in those years. So you could see like the Leafs would play the Habs on a Saturday night, and then for 50 cents on a Sunday afternoon, you could see the Marlboros of Dale Talon play against the junior Canadians of Guy Lafleur. It was outstanding, and it felt, just because of the uniforms, it felt like you were seeing the rivalry in a microscopic version of it. So I think that will never change. I mean, they are the two largest pockets of committed hockey fans in the world. The Leaf fan base just extends from Oshawa all the way down into the Niagara Peninsula there. It's a huge base, and similarly for Montreal. And I know that when the teams in the West first came into the NHL, Calgary, Edmonton, Vancouver, there are so many people living out here that grew up in those cities that honestly they would come to town, and it'd be like what you're talking about, Toronto fans taking over Buffalo. It would be the same in Calgary. When Lafleur was in his prime, he would come through here, and people would stand up the way they did in Montreal and chant "Gee, gee, gee." It was like a home game for these teams. So I mean, Kevin has hit the nail on the head. It has to do with these rabid fan bases that care so much. On our website, if the Leafs make a minor transaction, if they pick up Richard Panik on waivers from Tampa, that's the top story on the website. If it happens anyplace else, it's a one line in transactions, and so and I don't think that's ever going to change. And I think that's one of the reasons that you've probably heard the commissioner in the last couple of weeks talk about the second team in Toronto that's been rumored for a long time, and his contention is that because the primary team is so popular, that even with a market that's so committed to hockey and so large, that there's no guarantees that a second team would succeed, and it's because people just care so much about the Leafs and the Canadiens.
Yeah, that's a great point. Maybe they just need to go to an A and a B team, like youth sports, like an A, like Maple Leafs A, Maple Leafs B, and that way everything's Maple Leafs. And they, anyway, this was a great show, wonderful, perfect first show to talk about it. So Eric, where can people follow you on Twitter first off, and what are you working on?
Well, I'm at Edu and this week it's funny. It's a kind of a quiet week for me because the Flames are on the road. I've been working on a story for a little while that's way off the topic, but the NHL players and former players involved in the wine industry. And so I'm scheduled to speak to Wayne Gretzky later this week about his winery. He has a huge presence in the Canadian wine industry. Jim Fox, who played for the Kings as their color man there, is training to become a winemaker. He went to the University of California, Davis this summer, did an extension course there. He's a guy that's a cellar rat. Learning the wine industry from the ground up. So if you factor in Mario Lemieux wine collection, Val Bourre is making wines in California. So just going to spend a week exploring that and reacting to the news of the day.
Give us one song that everybody should be listening to right now, Eric.
One song. Oh God, you caught me off balance.
All right, I'm gonna go back to Kevin. I'll come back to you.
You know what? I've been listening to a lot. I've been listening to the Chrissy Hynde solo album. She's the former lead singer of the Pretenders, for people who don't know. And for the first time in ever, she's put out a solo album. It's been out for about a month. And the first track on it is called "You or No One," and it is, right now, it is a candidate for my #1 song of the year. I put out a best of at the end of every year, my favorite 20 new songs of the year, trying to stay current. And I was just playing with that list this weekend because I had a little time. It's Canadian Thanksgiving, and listening to everything, and I thought, okay, if nothing changes between now and the end of the year, that's going to be the #1 song. Chrissy Hynde, go on iTunes. It's really worth listening to.
Wow, awesome. I love that. That's great. I'm going to go. I love a huge Pretenders fan. I didn't know she had an album out. Kevin, so we follow you at Kevin Allen on Twitter. I know this.
Yep, absolutely. And been working on. I'm going to try to make sense of the Mike Babcock coaching situation. With the timing of the fact they're going to be playing the Maple Leafs this week, and so a lot of my colleagues will be writing about that as well. And I'm going to try to explain why it's really not a traditional coach situation. This is a very unique situation. And I'm also looking at some of the geography of sport. I did look yesterday and I saw that the American population now is 22.5% in the NHL, which is the highest it's ever been. It's now closer to 1 in 4 than 1 in 5. And it wasn't all that long ago that it was 10, 11, and 12%. And then the other thing I'd note is after the first game was played, everybody played their first game, only 18 Russians had played in the NHL this season too. So I would be trying to make a little sense of how there's still shifting sands in terms of who's actually playing in the NHL.
I love that. That's really good. Have either of you seen the series Transparent yet?
I haven't.
It's on Amazon. If you're an Amazon Prime member, which I think everybody in the world should be, because it's the cheapest thing in the world, and if you're Amazon Prime and you get free postage on all the things you order from Amazon, they have an instant video section on there, and they released their version, what everybody's calling their House of Cards. Okay, they're just and this is perhaps 10 times better than House of Cards. I mean, it's unbelievable. You've got to watch it. I don't want to say anything about it. Don't read about it. Don't Google it, just because there's some huge things about it that you don't want to know. But if you get Amazon Prime, if you search on Amazon for Transparent the series, you'll see it right away. Incredible cast, unbelievably well written show, and just like this weekend, just completely like the kind of thing that my wife and I said, you know what we should do? We should take off a day this week and stay in bed and watch the rest of this series. It's like they release it all at once. It's one of those series they released all at once, like they do with House of Cards, and it is that kind of thing. You just don't want to stop watching it, and the subject matter is absolutely bizarre for TV. So anyway, that's just my little tip in the social world today. Guys, remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey, and we will talk to you next week.